CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
You are listening to a podcast by a guy that shouldn't have a podcast. It's Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with my co-host Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. And this time last week, we were talking about how busy we were going to be with Western New York sports, high school football starting up and Bills season starting up. UB had a big game at Missouri, Sabres camp around the corner. But look, it's about as busy, with the exception of a local not playing for a tennis major. The Sabres have begun their rookie camp. UB is at home Saturday afternoon against UMass, a game that UB should win. Bills playing Thursday night, division play against the Miami Dolphins. A lot to talk about there, including some significant injuries on both sides of the ball. So, Jonah, it is here we are. You were out at Sabres rookie camp today, but let's start with the Bills because that's what's on most folks' minds. We're recording this on Wednesday, so the game is tomorrow night. Hopefully you have a chance to listen to this before the game. Josh Allen's got an injured left hand, and he was dismissive of any concerns. So have the Bills been. He was a full participant in practice. It is that offhand. It's his non-throwing mitt. But I was talking with some quarterbacks yesterday and the day before for a story at The Athletic, and they all say it's probably no big deal, probably. But then we got into all of the little things that will matter when it comes to Josh Allen and his left hand injury. Interviewed Archie Manning, Warren Moon, Phil Simms, Jake Plummer, all four who have played with offhand, off-arm injuries. Obviously, I just didn't pick those guys out of a hat. But you were out there this week too. Did you get any sense, before we get into all the little things that we are going to need to be mindful of when we watch the Bills Thursday night in Miami Gardens, to make sure that Josh Allen is okay? But Jonah, you were out there this week at One Bills Drive. It seems like they were kind of just blowing it off. But then again, isn't that what you would do regardless of the situation? Short week, the whole thing.
Well, yeah, and I think that the Bills have done something similar. Maybe not always, but Josh Allen has had some injuries that he's played through that didn't cause him to miss any games or parts of any games, but he was appearing on injury reports in the past, and the Bills have generally had the vibe that it was not going to be a problem. I mean, there was the one time with the elbow injury where he didn't practice, didn't throw early in the week, and then was kind of hiding the fact that he had returned to practice and was throwing the ball later in the week. I think this is less concerning of an injury than the elbow and shoulder injuries and some of the other dinged up situations that Josh Allen has had over the past couple of years. It probably doesn't prevent him from doing a lot of the things that he's good at. But anytime a player who's as important to the Bills and as important to any football team as Josh Allen is less than 100% in any way and feeling any pain, I think that there's some level of concern about a possible re-injury, or, as you mentioned, or you kind of detailed, the little ways that having an injury to your non-throwing hand could affect a quarterback, especially one like Josh Allen, who initiates contact on his runs and might be stiff arming with that hand. And before he landed awkwardly on that hand, he was, using it to propel himself over Budda Baker's helmet. So the hurdles and some of the extra things that Josh Allen is able to do as a running quarterback might be limited by this hand injury, or he just might be more careful and less willing to do those things.
If he can be more careful, he's such an instinctual player. And that's the one thing that Jake Plummer brought up. By the way, Jake Plummer, probably the least accomplished of the other three, or of the four that I interviewed, he's the least accomplished. But he was my favorite interview of the four. And he got into a lot of things that you wouldn't think of. And I'll give a brief overview. I want you to read the story. It'll be posted Thursday morning at The Athletic, very, very early, probably by 6 a.m. or so. It'll be posted. But you have the pain, number one, but let's just say that it's not a significant injury and there's no pain necessarily. It is the short week. There is swelling. There is fewer days to get treatment on it, fewer days to also learn some maybe muscle memory type things that they need to do with handing off to the right. For instance, you're talking about imagine being from the quarterback's vantage point. Well, number one, it's going to be this direct snap from center. And you think, well, the Bills can go shotgun, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the Bills under Joe Brady still went about 30% direct snap, over 30% direct snap over last season's games with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. And they were over 40% direct snap against the Cardinals. I'll look it up exactly, but whatever it was something like 44, maybe 44%, something like that, direct snap. So they do that. Connor McGovern has things that he's going to need to worry about when he's snapping it back to Josh Allen, and yet he's got nothing to worry about. He's supposed to not be thinking about it because even on the direct snap, he's got to fire it back just as much as he could on any other play. They're going to be in Miami Gardens, loud crowd perhaps, silent count. If Connor McGovern decides to kind of just gingerly put it back there, even to take a little bit off of his snaps, he might have somebody jumping off sides. In a shotgun situation, if he floats it back there a little bit, it could throw off motion. I'm talking about pre-snap motion. It could throw off the running back's timing if there's a handoff or a pitch involved. So Connor McGovern, as he explained to me, has to act as though Josh Allen is 100%. He cannot be the reason why the play blows up before it even begins. So that's a big part. Then you have Josh Allen handing off to his right. A quarterback uses his left hand to stick the ball in the running back's stomach. It's a problem that all four of the quarterbacks I've talked to stressed being a big one, and all the different things that they would do to try to manipulate or cope with their left arm injury when it came to that, things that they couldn't do, things that maybe even made it a little more dangerous to do with the ball, maybe using your right hand when you're supposed to be using your left. Josh Allen's going to have to be concerned about further injury. It's supposed to rain, hurricane blowing through South Florida. Today, I believe it's going to strike a little bit more on the western side of the peninsula than the eastern side, headed towards Louisiana, but you're probably going to have some thunderstorms. I don't want to say probably. You could have thunderstorms, but there's probably going to be some precipitation. So you have a wet football with keeping it secure, even two healthy hands. It's imperative. And now Josh Allen has one that's going to have a wrap on it or a glove that he's been practicing with. I just think there's a lot to look at. And that's why I reached out to these guys, because they've played through it. And it was fascinating for them to get into the granular things that when you read the story and then watch the game Thursday night, you're going to be constantly thinking and considering, okay, is everything going to be all right? And as you see him go through these things that these longtime veteran quarterbacks, decorated quarterbacks went through, then I think it's going to make for maybe it'll make you a little nervous before the game, but it should add to your educated enjoyment of what Josh Allen's up to on Thursday night.
Yeah, it's a good breakdown of some of the micro ways that this injury could affect any quarterback, and specifically Josh Allen. On the macro sense, Josh Allen could play the rest of the season without sustaining another injury. It's certainly possible, and he's shown an ability throughout his career to remain healthy, be durable, play through injuries. However, the Bills need so much out of Josh Allen this season, and week one was a very good example of the superhero type play that Josh Allen needs to play just for the Bills to win a home game by 6 points. And
over an inferior organization. I'm not going to say a team because maybe the Cardinals are going to be a surprise, but that's an organization that if they have figured it out after winning 4 games last year, then it'll be a minor miracle. That's a team that the Bills have to beat in their home opener if they want to get anywhere near to the over of 10.5 that Vegas has them at with victories. If they want to get to 11 wins, they cannot struggle against an Arizona.
And for Josh Allen to get injured in the very first game on his most super heroic play of a super heroic second half, and I know the first touchdown came in the first half, but second kind of part of the game where he had those 4 touchdowns, it just makes you wonder if he can get through a whole season without sustaining more injury, a more serious injury, or even an accumulation of injuries. As can the Bills get to the playoffs with Josh Allen playing at this level without somehow getting hurt in a way that limits him and limits the offense and limits this team's ultimate potential when it's happening so quickly. And they had to be very careful with Josh Allen in the preseason to prevent any kind of injury there. Backup quarterback got hurt very early in the preseason.
Backup quarterbacks, plural.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And those things are not related, but it does kind of feel that way. It does kind of feel like the Bills can't get through a game without their quarterback getting hurt, and the Bills can't get anywhere this season if Josh Allen gets hurt significantly.
One thing that the Bills do have going for them, it was something that I was actually surprised. Phil Simms he was pretty passionate about this, is that the game being on grass will help him because the jarring nature, and he wasn't even talking about back when he played, when it was pretty much all-purpose office carpet on top of concrete in those stadiums, including at Rich Stadium, but at the Meadowlands too. He's saying even today's artificial turf adds to your wariness about injury about how you're going to feel the next day and how tough it is to shake off injuries and feeling miserable after a game on artificial turf. So playing on the grass in Miami Gardens will be very helpful to Josh Allen, and also augment that thought by they don't play again until the following Monday night. So if the Bills can get through this game and play it the way they want to play it, and whether it be with hydration and the South Florida humidity or avoiding more injuries to their defensive backfield with Taron Johnson being out for a while with his forearm injury, that this is maybe a pretty good time to have a short week. Get it out of the way. They're going to have this mini bye, and then they can figure things out going into that game against the Jacksonville Jaguars on Monday night. But to your point, Jonah, about Josh Allen and playing like he did on Sunday and how they're going to need it with a dimmer supporting cast. And I use the word dimmer in terms of like star power. There's no Stephon Diggs anymore. Gabriel Davis, even though he was frustrating to watch, did have amazing games at times. To be without him, to watch the Bills have to spray the ball all over the place with Arizona taking Dalton Kincaid out of the game, it's going to have to be an all hands on deck situation for the Bills offense, with Josh Allen being the guy, as we saw, to your point, which is why I wrote what I did off of the game on Sunday, that Josh Allen needs to be the MVP if the Bills want to get to where they go this year. I think that that's evident. Again, it's just one game. Maybe James Cook occasionally can pop up for a 175-yard, 3-touchdown game, or there are different dudes that can make a big play. Terrell Bernard has a pick 6, or, who knows? Special teams make a big play, and Josh Allen doesn't have to be a hero on a weekly basis. But I think that was the sentiment of my column off of that Sunday game, is if Josh Allen is an MVP player and he shows it this year, then you're not going to have to worry about Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or anybody else stealing away his votes, as Bills fans have been, or anybody considering him overrated as an NFL quarterback in anonymous player polls. Taron Johnson being out, obviously that's a much bigger injury than Josh Allen's, although Josh Allen being the marquee player. Taron Johnson, incredibly important to the Bills secondary. They're able to survive the Cardinals game without him. I'm picking the Dolphins to win this game on Buffalo Kickoff Live on Channel 4 tomorrow before the game. I don't know if I'm the only one, but as the predictions were coming in, I was the only one for a while. I don't know if it finished out that way, but I have a hard time when I'm looking at this game and I'm imagining the chess pieces moving around. I'm having a hard time imagining the Bills being able to cover Mike McDaniel's offense in a way that makes me forget how wide open the Arizona Cardinals were running around the field for Kyler Murray and their 37-year-old offensive coordinator. Now, Mike McDaniel's young too, but I guess that's the age maybe doesn't matter as much as I wanted to make it sound there when I threw on that caveat or that qualifier. But the Cardinals did not have a lot of offensive wherewithal in turn, their system being a thing, like Miami's system is a thing that you have to worry about every defensive opponent. And I don't know that I can just keep saying the Bills are going to win or predict the Bills to win just because Mike McDaniel has had a hard time doing it. Based on what I saw, if Mike McDaniel or if the Dolphins players were running around the field like the Cardinals players were wide open, then the Bills probably don't win on the opener.
Yeah, I'm picking the Dolphins to win this game as well. I think a lot of it I would attribute to being a schedule loss for the Bills, being the road team on a Thursday night. I know the numbers say that the home field advantage in Thursday night games isn't much different than it is in traditional Sunday games, but it does feel that way. And there definitely does seem like there's I think a natural feeling that the home team that doesn't have to travel has an advantage in this shorter week. Just the way the schedule is formulated for the Bills, this does seem like one of their hardest challenges, having to turn around and go on the road and play a division rival so quickly after the first game. The Bills have dominated the matchup with the Dolphins during Josh Allen's career in the last 5, 6, however many years that is. I don't know if that necessarily means the Dolphins can't beat the Bills. I think there's been games where the Dolphins have kept the game close and played well in spurts and haven't put together their best game against the Bills, and that might still be coming. They might have a motivation edge from the way they've lost to the Bills and the way their seasons have ended or their division title hopes last year ended against the Bills. They almost won a playoff game here with Skylar Thompson at quarterback. They had a very good chance, I think, to win that game in Miami last year, and it didn't go their way in the end. Jordan Poyer, I think, gives them a little bit of emotional juice in this game, and maybe when they play again later this year, at his age and his injury history, that's not as much of a factor. The Bills certainly can win this game. I just think a lot more is stacked against the Bills than it is the Dolphins. And I think that's why you saw this line open as a 1-point advantage for the Dolphins being favored by 1 point. And I believe it's moved to 2.5 points now. From the outside objective perspective, people seem to think the Dolphins are the favorites in this game. But in Buffalo, there's this knee-jerk response that Josh Allen is the Dolphins' daddy, and the Dolphins can't win the game no matter what happens.
So Taron Johnson being out, as crucial as that is, we were talking not that long ago about Joe Andreessen being the UB hero, the local, but there's another UB player now that is going to have to step in and fill, well, hell, two, right? That we may see filling very important roles. And what are your thoughts on those two guys? I know that, those are stories that you were kicking around, tying because you cover a lot of UB too. And it's a good Channel 4 story. It's a good story period about UB's players going to have a prominent role Thursday night.
It's a great UB story. Didn't get much reaction from UB this week. The funny thing about that is,
they didn't know this guy. That's 2 regimes ago, right?
It's 2 regimes ago. Cam Lewis and Jamarcus Ingram both played for different coaches, and now there's another coach. I mean, Mark Allnut has been the athletic director. There has been one constant. John Fuller, the athletic communications boss over there. So there are people that have watched all of these guys play and I think appreciate these connections. Brandon Beane talked about how the local pro day and having the ability to bring all these UB players in on their own has been somewhat of an advantage for the Bills in finding these gems. On that, and something about Cam Lewis that might be interesting. Now, Taron Johnson has a forearm injury. Hasn't been reported anywhere that he broke his arm. I think there is some belief that that might be the case. I'm not reporting that myself, but I think some of us believe that might be the case. Cam Lewis played with a broken arm in his senior season at UB, and Lance Leipold called him the toughest player he's ever coached around that time. So, just something about Cam Lewis. He played excellent filling in for Taron Johnson. I don't think there's a huge worry about him in that spot. There maybe is a collective worry of the Bills just continuing to lose their best players and another all-pro player who's not in the lineup. But I think the early returns, and Cam Lewis has been building up to this, and he's probably better in that slot position than he maybe was on the outside. Some of the times he had some trouble defending deeper passes on the outside might not be a factor in what he does. He showed an ability to get in the backfield and be a run defender. From the Bills side of things, I think this is just another example of their ability to develop defensive backs and players in that back seven and have players who maybe 3-4 years ago, Cam Lewis wasn't quite ready for this role, but the coaching and experience in the system, same with Jamarcus Ingram, they're now members of the Bills secondary that you rely on, and it gives you even more confidence in the Bills' ability to develop Dorian Williams or whoever they're going to need at safety down the line. I don't worry as much when the Bills lose a defensive starter in the back seven anymore. Sometimes it takes a few weeks, but they usually find that replacement, and then lo and behold, sometimes that replacement ends up being as good or better than the guy that was hurt that you were worried about, the younger guy coming in for.
Jamarcus Ingram came in and played 11 snaps for the Bills against Arizona, but Cam Lewis played 55, 90% of the defensive snaps. Cam Lewis was out there with Taron Johnson hurt. He was only able to play 7 snaps.
The one thing I'd wonder about Cam Lewis, despite what I just said about him maybe being the toughest player that Lance Leipold ever coached and a guy who played every down in college, is that he hasn't often been an every down player in the NFL. And coming off a big game, but a game where he had to make a lot of tackles, a lot of physical plays on a short week, maybe there's something, I don't want to say he's not ready for, but maybe there's more acclimation needed for him to be able to come back and play that well again in a 5-day span. So just the volume of snaps and the volume of physical plays, having not done that so regularly in his NFL career. And then he's a key special teams player. Now that he's on the defense, does he not play special teams, or does that further tax his body? That's something the Bills have to think about and weigh coming into this game.
The Bills historically have done well against Tyreek Hill, or at least as a Dolphin, but clearly he is the player that the Bills secondary is going to need to be aware at all times, as they have all these moving parts with Taylor Rapp as the graybeard, I guess, of the safeties. Damar Hamlin played okay in the opener, but a lot of people still concerned about Damar Hamlin, even from 2 years ago, thought that he was maybe a liability at times. It's a great story and where he is, and he's back to competitiveness and competency, and but with you then taking Taron Johnson out of the mix, I came across this Tyreek Hill stat today, and I want to share it because it was a head shaker for me. I know that Tyreek Hill is a great player, but this really sums it up. So through 9 seasons, he already has 22 games of 125 yards or more. Excuse me. That is tied for third with Calvin Johnson and Randy Moss for players through their first 9 seasons. They also had 22 games of at least 125 yards. And second only to Lance Allworth and Jerry Rice for players who've had that kind of production in a single game. And so that is how explosive this guy is. It's, again, the Bills have done well against him since he's joined the Dolphins. But It'll be interesting here to see if they can keep the lid on this guy.
And Rasul Douglas played very well and took Marvin Harrison Jr. out of the game in the opener. Tyreek Hill is obviously a different type of receiver and a different type of matchup, and we don't even know how often Rasul Douglas will be on him. But Rasul Douglas has been excellent for the Bills since the day they traded for him, and that's continued into this season and might again be a factor in this matchup with Tyreek Hill. Interesting thing with Tyreek Hill, I think, is he's the biggest story in football right now, and it has nothing to do with football. It has everything to do with what happened on his ride to the stadium last week. That might not be a factor at all in this game, but it could be. It could be a galvanizing factor for the Dolphins. It could be a distraction for Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins this week. They've been talking about that and reacting to that in their press conferences, I think, a lot more than they have to the Bills and Josh Allen in this matchup. I don't know which way that's going to fall, and it's certainly possible that it really has nothing to do with what happens on the field. But again, it does feel like that's a storyline coming into this game that might, coming out of the game, you might look at that and think that was a factor.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with all of that. And there's nothing for me to even add because you summed it up perfectly. Let's stay with UB. I mean, I know we flipped it over there and talked about Tyreek Hill a little bit there, but we just talking about UB. And then we'll get to Sabres rookie camp. UMass at UB in Amherst, 1:00 Saturday afternoon. This is a non-conference game, Joe, and I don't know really what's to say. I mean, it's one of those, they already won their early non-conference game. These are the games that make UB football fans frustrated because they lose these games, and they have. I don't know. I'll just tee it up for you that way. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Well, it is a non-conference game, but not quite, because
UMass does have a Mid-American Conference tie-in.
They're Mid-American Conference in waiting, and they've played two MAC teams so far this season. And, after this season, it's going to be a conference game when UB plays UMass, and might be a bit of a MAC rivalry considering they're the two most Eastern teams. They both play in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Amherst, New York.
I should have clarified that. I said the game's in Amherst, and some people might think that it's in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And even though it isn't a MAC game that's going to count in the MAC standings, it's a game that's a much better gauge of whether UB can be competitive in the MAC this year than playing against an FCS team in the home game to open the season, and then playing at Missouri, which was number 9 and now up to number 6. So whether the UB wins or loses, I think you'll have a much better sense of how good this team is and how competitive it can be against MAC competition based on this game and comparing it to the results of the other two MAC teams that UMass has played, and just not having to play a team full of SEC NFL draft picks, but also not an FCS opponent where UB has a little bit of that talent advantage. It's also a home game. UB can, I think this will be the first time in 4 seasons that UB can win its first 2 home games. And I think it's just good. I don't know if UB is going to be a team that contends for bowl eligibility, but this is the game they need to win, I think, to get to 6 wins and have that as a hope and have that as a carrot for them going into the end of the season. And they just need to play better, specifically on offense, specifically in the passing game, and quarterback CJ Agbana. If that doesn't happen and this isn't a good result for UB, or it isn't a good offensive performance, there could be some questions about depth chart changes and whether at quarterback or somewhere else in the offense, UB needs to recalibrate for their MAC opener that is coming up. And I want to make a comment on that game 2 weeks ago, but before I say that, UB is also dealing with maybe a significant injury. Nick McMillan, their best wide receiver, a Canisius high school former player, he's going to miss this game with a knee injury. That might hurt UB a little bit in one of the areas of the game where they struggled a lot against Missouri. After this game against UMass, UB's next game is against Northern Illinois, who's number 25 in the country and has a bye this week, probably going to stay in the top 25 going into that game. So UB will have 2 ranked teams on their schedule within the first 4 weeks. Northern Illinois just beat Notre Dame, maybe the biggest win in MAC history. So that's going to be a tough matchup for UB.
In South Bend, by the way.
Right. And Missouri probably better than Notre Dame, but UB lost 38-0 and really never had a chance in that game. They kept it close for about a quarter. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame, but I think the line, it's a thinner line than that might suggest between a MAC school that doesn't beat a Big Ten team on the road or an SEC Power 5, I'll say. UB could play well and have a chance to win at Northern Illinois. It's not that Northern Illinois is a juggernaut and UB doesn't have the horses to play in that game. So I just think it's interesting. We talked about it last week. You asked me, can UB win at Missouri? I didn't think they could, but you know, you never know. You execute well enough, and it's Division I football. These players do have enough talent, I think, to compete and play these games. But everything has to go right, and you have to play your A+ game, and you need that other team to play, you know, below their A+ level.
It's funny because when I asked that question, and it was probably out of my mouth for 3 seconds before I realized I should have formulated the question better, you know, like, can they cover? How competitive can they be? But what I had in mind is, look, I followed the MAC for a long time because I grew up in Northeast Ohio. That was the conference that I was most interested in, even more than the Big Ten. I followed Bowling Green and Kent State and Akron way more than I followed OSU and Michigan and all this other stuff. Why? I don't know. Probably because kids from my conferences and in my area that I grew up in, that's where they went and played. And I don't know. My brother and sister both graduated from Kent State, and I was just drawn to it. I don't know. But every year they would have a competitive game or two, or sometimes 4 or 5 early on in the season against a juggernaut, these MAC teams. And then again, latest example being what you just said, Northern Illinois goes into South Bend, shocks Notre Dame. And again, I didn't know that was going to happen. It's not like I was psychic about Northern Illinois, but when I'm asking the question about UB, you'd like to see them come up and do something at some point over these years. I moved to Buffalo in 2000. My first job was covering college sports. It was Craig Service trying to turn UB football into a Division 1A competitive program. And I don't know. So it's been 24 years. I'd like to see UB stun somebody. And it doesn't seem like, if you were to compare the UB Missouri game and the Northern Illinois Notre Dame game, which you were just doing, it doesn't even seem like we're talking about the same conferences or the same. It's not, there's no allegory.
Maybe they need to get Notre Dame on the schedule.
A Syracuse, maybe.
Yeah,
that has happened. I know
that has happened. And
you would
Buffalo
think.
played.
I don't know. I would like to see them play
Syracuse.
Army. I'd like the New York teams to have to play each other.
They played Army in the past. It's been a few years. You know,
on the regular basis. I mean,
yeah, scheduling's tough for MAC schools. I mean, they get these games and they make a lot of money in these games, but you have to book them out like 10 years in advance, and they don't have much say in who they get, or they kind of just take the most money and the best opportunity they have for those schedules. But yeah, eventually, you know, as a Division I program, UB kind of needs that signature win, at least for the fans' sake. And maybe they don't need it, but it does feel that way. And it's been a long time, I think, since they went into one of these games and you thought they had a good chance of pulling it off. They played tough at Penn State a few years back. A lot of it depends on how good that other team is and how ready to play that Power 5 team is. But you also probably need to be UB at its best, like it was with Lance Leipold as the coach, or for a brief period with Turner Gill, and not UB in a downward swoon as it is coming out of Maurice Linguist's tenure and now Pete Lembo trying to rebuild things.
Speaking of booking things 10 years out, Jonah, you were out at Sabres rookie camp today. I was not. I was consumed with Bills football and heading to Miami and the whole thing on the short week. But Sabres rookie camp, people get excited about it every year, or at least, well, maybe not excited. They're borderline interested. I don't, but again, to me, it's always fascinating that we start covering these guys who we're not going to see for years, you know, booking them several years out. You're drafting in the NHL, and yes, maybe there's a guy who might make the roster, but you're talking mostly about Rochester guys, maybe ECHL guys, maybe guys who are, you know, floating around and maybe not making any Sabres organizational roster. But how do you go out there and cover it? What's the vibe regarding the roster? I know that I think there were 5 first-round draft picks on the ice today. What drew your attention?
Well, you know, it's a cumulative thing. I'm kind of out there for a few days, and then hopefully you find some storylines or what I'm most likely going to write it is some sort of catch-all at the end about everything that happens. It's part of the ramp up towards the season, but yeah, you are right in that, you might not be seeing guys that are on the NHL roster this year at all in this prospects challenge, but there are a lot of players that figure into the Sabres future and probably near-term future. Yuri Kulich, Zach Rosane, they've already played 2 full seasons in Rochester, and if they're not ready to play in the NHL right now, they're very close. And the way the Sabres approach free agency and fill out the roster, there might not be a roster spot for them unless Zach Benson is going down to Rochester, and I don't know if that's the case. He's not here at the rookie camp prospects challenge. I think it's an interesting event to kind of scout for the future and see these prospects, and especially if you're a Rochester Americans fan, you get to see up close what that team's going to look like this season. Ryan Johnson, he's here. He's a player who has played with the Sabres for a large number of games before being sent back down to the minors. It'd be interesting to see if any of these players are ready, can be camp surprises, can steal a roster spot the way Zach Benson did last year, or if they're playing so well in Rochester that the time does come that they need to be elevated into the roster. The Sabres do seem to have this hole in the forward line right now for a top 6 forward who can score goals, replacing what Jeff Skinner gave them. Maybe Yuri Kulich is that guy. Eventually, all of these guys really need to show that they can play defensive hockey in a two-way game and maybe not a top 6 high-scoring winger role. But the Sabres might need that type of player, and they might have a few young options, and a lot of them possible options are going to be on the ice at Harbor Center this weekend.
What's the situation there with these practices are open to the public, or some of them are, or all of them are?
Well, the Prospect Challenge games are open to the public. I don't believe the practices are, at least today's practice was not public. Oh, there were some people. I don't know exactly how Harbor Center works. If it's a little bit like, UB Alumni Arena, where it's kind of always open because people are running around on that track, just living life.
Right.
There's students coming through.
Can't keep them out of there.
It seems like there's sometimes a little bit of that at Harbor Center, but I don't want to say that they're open to fans when they're not, but there weren't a lot of fans. It did seem like a not public practice today, and I believe that's the case for tomorrow's practice, but then they're playing games Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night.
Anything else, Jonah?
NLL draft coming up. Bandit's
Oh.
putting together their roster, and I think a schedule announcement's probably coming soon after that, and we'll see when they get to lower their banner at KeyBank Center. And this prospects challenge is the ramp up to the real training camp for the Sabres. And next week we're going to get to see, we've seen photos, but get to see up close the new scoreboard and the other new, I guess you just had to drive on the Skyway to see the new roof, but the new things that are there at KeyBank Center and the new season and Lindy Ruff back behind the bench, the new players, the new roster. Then they go overseas to Germany for an exhibition game and opening the season in Prague. But hockey season is going to be here sooner than later. And this Prospects Challenge is really the start of welcoming back the hockey season.
I have it jotted down here, so I might as well share it. I'll leave everybody here with a Josh Allen stat. Before I get to that, though, let me remind you, please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things that you can do on your platform of choice to support Tim Graham and friends. We greatly appreciate it. But here is a stat heading into Thursday night's game against the Dolphins. Josh Allen is tied with Cam Newton in NFL history with 37 games of at least one passing and one rushing touchdown. So you've got to think that he's eventually going to get that record. And with the way that we were talking about Josh Allen and how he needs to play, and the Bills are going to be leaning on him this year, you'd like to think that he breaks that record pretty soon here in the net. And that's not like the Tyreek stat earlier. That's not through 9 seasons or through this or through that. That's for NFL history, most games with a rushing and passing touchdown. Another stat, I might as well empty the notebook here. He's also tied with Cam Newton for 10 games with 2 rushing touchdowns, but he's behind Jalen Hurts in that one. So it may take, so just because he passes Cam Newton, which he'll eventually do, he's still going to have to catch up to Jalen Hurts, who is young and looks like he's going to be doing this for a while too. So that could be a race that Josh Allen has trouble winning, but that record for passing and rushing touchdowns looks like that'll be his pretty soon.
Well, Josh Allen is the quarterback on one of my fantasy teams, so we'll see if he benefits my team. I had him on one team and I played against him on the other team, so I don't know whether I should be rooting for him to score or not, or if I should even be having those kind of thoughts while I'm sitting in the press box trying to be an objective journalist.
Well, Jonah, what you should be rooting for is not necessarily your opponent, because that's just 1 week. You need to root for Josh Allen to stay healthy.
Yeah, well, I think the problem with that team is too many Buffalo Bills players.
Oh, do you want to talk about that?
Well,
Let's save it for next week. Let's save it for next week, because we can get into that for a good 10 minutes. It is amazing. Let's just leave it at that. Thanks to everybody out. Thanks to everybody out there for listening or for watching, whichever you preferred. On to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.